this afternoon. I think Roy and Mary are with us this morning. The Reedies are with us, and we have somebody from New Jersey. And we'll start recording now.
Well, good to see everybody this morning. It's kind of a cloudy day out there, but it's still nice and warm. And of course, we're nice and dry in here. And we're happy to see you out there, wherever you might be. Hope the weather's been good. Hope you've had a great week, and I'm glad you can join us for our weekly study time. This is homechurch.us. And we're all about just getting back to the Word, focusing on that. We've eliminated all the frills and all the things that take up time at a normal church type setting. The Word's the important thing, and that's what changes your life. But anyway, let me invite you just to pause a second and go to the Word.
It's turned on. Well, then the battery died. The Word's turned on.
Yeah.
I'll look at that here in a second.
Father, we want to thank you for bringing us here safely this morning, and for trusting you with our lives. Thank you for life itself and all its blessings that come, even the challenges that you allow. And we know that your interest in saving us is paramount, and we know that because of the price that heaven had to pay to make it possible. So we want to thank you, Lord, that we can be responsive to that. We want to thank you that we can have an opportunity to share that message with others around the planet. We do pray and ask for your Spirit to be here with us this morning and teach and guide and direct us. We're looking, Lord, for that blessing that you've promised, and we want to gladly receive it. We want to ask that you be with all those on our prayer list, certainly all those who are watching and joining us online, and Lord, that you would accomplish in us and through us your will today, and until you come to take us home. We want to pray that those on our prayer list, that you would draw near to them, and that your will be accomplished, and that you might receive the glory and the honor and the praise for all that you do. And we ask these mercies in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen and amen. Okay, so
Talk a little bit about this week. I've got to go get some hot tea. No. Don't pull that back.
sorry.
I just need to get away from the cord so I don't knock something off.
Okay, I could have brought this into you. Anyway,
Where's the mouse?
let me just say that before we go to our story, that there's of course always a lot going on around the world, and all these things are just indications that the Lord is. The Lord's timetable for the plan of salvation is, of course, coming to an end shortly. You know, we've been playing around with this thing called sin for almost 6,000 years now, and we saw the results of mankind filling up their cup of iniquity during the time of the flood.
God washed it clean. But even in that, he was setting an example for and illustrating what he would do in the plan of salvation to clarify things for his creation. We often forget that there's a big creation out there that God has to consider. We're one little planet, often in a galaxy. And there are just millions of galaxies out there, so astounding that God would even take us seriously, take us into consideration. But God's Word is true, and that He first loved us, and that He created us special, and after His own image. So we certainly have high honor, high stake in His created world. And the cost to make it possible for any of us to experience heaven has just been astounding. We've talked about that for a couple of years now.
But
most within Christianity don't realize it. The other thing that we want to do this morning before our story, we can have the story?
If I can get through it.
Okay. Is we want to give a shout out to all the moms out there.
Shout out to all the moms.
Shout out to all the moms.
Shout out to all you mothers.
Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, it's today? No, tomorrow's Mother's Day.
What an important role. I mean, just the idea that God would allow us to
He didn't
procreate, to have children, says something in and of itself. But, you know, moms are special
Huh?
in that they, the typical mom has the utmost interest and well-being for their children. They sacrifice constantly for their children. Even if they're grown and gone, they're still praying for them. They're still sacrificing for them in ways that they know not. Unfortunately, most of us as children, when we grow up, we take our moms for granted. So I just want to say to everybody out there, do something special for your mom today.
It's good now.
Do something special for her.
We lose the fan noise?
Huh?
We lose the fan noise?
Yeah.
Good. Great.
Cheers.
That is encouraging. Thank you.
Don't know why it randomly does that. It must be a software issue. Or something.
During our time together, what we typically do is we have prayer, and then we have a little inspirational story, and then we go into the Word.
A little inspirational story.
So Mom's going to take
Sounds
about
like
10
Kids'
minutes.
Corner.
10 minutes, and we're talking about the spiritual warfare. This is a fictional account, but in reality, we know that's going on all the time. So we're going through Peretti's book on spiritual warfare.
A few states away, in a deep, secluded, and steep-sided valley, rimmed with high mountains and carpeted with thick green ground cover, a small but well-constructed cluster of buildings nestled like a lonely outpost in the center of a valley floor, accessible by only one rough and meandering gravel road. That little cluster of buildings, once a dismal and dilapidated old ranch, had been expanded into a complex of stone and brick buildings that now housed a small dormitory, an office complex, a dining hall, maintenance building, clinic, and several private dwellings. There were no signs, however, no labels anywhere, nothing to indicate where or what anything was. Drawing a charcoal streak across the sky, a sinister black object flew over the mountaintops and began to drop into the valley, piercing through paper-thin layers of mist that hung in the air. Cloaked by oppressive spiritual darkness and silent as a black cloud, Baal Rafar, the Prince of Babylon, floated along. He stayed close to the contour of the mountainside, maneuvering on a course weaving this way and that. The canopy of darkness followed him like a cast shadow, like a tiny circle of night upon the landscape. Below, the ranch looked like a huge hive of hideous black insects. Several layers of ruthless warriors hovered almost stationary in a vast dome of defense over the complex, their swords drawn, yellow eyes peering across the valley. Deep within this shell, demons of all shapes, sizes, and strengths darted about in a boiling mass of activity. As Rafar dropped lower, he noted a concentration of dark spirits around a large multi-storied stone house on the fringe of the cluster. The strong man is there, he thought, so he banked gently to one side and changed his course for that building. The outer sentinels saw him approaching and gave an eerie siren-like wail, and immediately the defenders radiated outward from Rafar's flight path, opening a channel through the defense layers. Rafar swooped skillfully through the channel as demons on all sides saluted him with upheld swords. He ignored them and passed quickly through. The channel closed again behind him like a living gate. He floated slowly down through the roof of the house, through the attic, past the rafters and walls and plaster, through an upstairs bedroom, through a thick-beamed support floor, down into a spacious living room below. The evil in the room was thick and confining, and the darkness like black liquid that swirled about with any motion of the limbs. The room was crowded. The strong man never wasted words. Shall we be detained again? The errors of Prince Lucius are being corrected. The new resistance is failing, my lord. Soon the town will be ready. And what of the host of heaven? They're limited. The strong man did not like Rafar's answer. Rafar could feel that distinctly. He spoke slowly. "We have reports of a strong captain of the host being sent to Ashton. I believe you know him." "I have reasons to believe Tal has been sent, but I have anticipated him." The big velvet-draped eyes burned with fury. "Is not this Tal who vanquished you at the fall of Babylon?" And Rafar knew he must answer, and quickly. "It is this Tal." "Then the delays have cost us our advantage. You have now been matched, strength for strength." "My lord, you will see what your servants can do." "Bold words, Rafar, but your strengths can only succeed with immediacy. The strengths of our enemies grow with time." "All will be ready. And what of the man of God and the newspapermen? Does my lord even give them his attention? Your lord wishes you to give them yours." "They are powerless, my lord. They will soon be removed." "But only if Tal is removed," the strong man said derisively. "Let me see it happen before you bother me in boasting about it. Until then, we remain confined here. Rafar, I will not wait long. Nor shall you need to." The strong man only smirked. "You have your orders. Begone." Rafar bowed low, and with an unfurling of his wings, he quietly rose through the house until he was outside. Then, with a furious burst of rage, he swooped upward, sending unexpected demons tumbling out of the way. He picked up speed, his wings rushing in a blinding blur, and the defenders could barely get a channel open before he burst through it, trailing a hot stream of sulphurous breath. They closed up the channel again, giving each other curious looks as they watched him soar away. He roared like a rocket up the side of the mountains and out over the craggy peaks and back toward the little town of Ashton. In his rage, he cared not who saw him. He cared not about stealth or even decorum. Let the whole world see him. Let it tremble. He was Rafar, the prince of Babylon. Let all the world bow before him or be decimated under the edge of his sword. Tal. The very name was bitterness itself on his tongue. The words of Lucifer would never let him forget that defeat so long ago. The lords of Lucifer. Never until the day when Rafar redeemed his honor. And indeed he would. Rafar could see his sword gutting Tal and scattering him in shreds and pieces across the sky. He could feel the impact in his arms and hear the ripping sound of it. It was only a matter of time. And among the jagged rocks on one mountainside summit, a silver-haired man came out of hiding to watch Rafar quickly shrink into the distance, etching a long black trail across the sky until he vanished over the horizon. The man took one more look at the demon-swarmed cluster of buildings in the valley, looked again toward the horizon, then vanished down the other side of the mountain in a flash of light and a flurry of wings. And that's the end of this segment.
You know, during the Civil War in this country, back in the 1800s, also called the War of the North, between the North and the South, you had a lot of times on the Mason-Dixon line, you had one brother going to one side and one brother going to the other side, and they would end up fighting against one another wherever they ended up. I'm wondering, you know, as you read that, I'm just kind of wondering, I wonder if some of the evil angels know some of the good angels. You know, like in heaven before the fall, you know, before they were cast out, you know, did they live next door to, you know, one another? Did they communicate? You know, I mean, it's hard for us to imagine kind of the perfection of heaven and everything being so serene and wonderful, and you know, no robbery, no stealing, no that kind of thing going on, but just communing together. And I just wonder how many of the evil angels can look as they're involved in this controversy and say, "Oh yeah, I knew that guy when I was, you know, in heaven," that kind of thing.
Well, how much more even kind of hopeless it must seem as well to know you're on the losing side.
When you consider that there were millions of angels before the fall, it's very likely that a lot of them didn't truly know each other because it's just sheer numbers. You get to know a close circle of people that
Well, you don't know how long they had before the fall either. They could have had a million years before the fall.
But just think of the history that they have. They knew, all these angels know the fallen angels. They know that they were in
Once.
heaven at some point,
But they chose to leave.
honoring Lucifer, like, and then he steps away, and of course a lot of them step away with him.
They didn't step away, they were driven out.
Well, they were driven
Right,
out, but they
right.
chose to go.
They
with
chose
Lucifer.
allegiance to him, and that's why they were driven out. But you got to wonder if there's regret, if there's such a thing as possible with an angel to have regret about, making that choice.
I feel there must be. I mean, because I guess it's hard to understand because they are different types of beings, but I imagine they have similar feelings. I feel like they're probably at that place where they've gone so far they can't regret anymore. Now their only goal is to hurt God as much as possible.
And maybe the only thing that they're focused on now is anger.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like there's like maybe at the very end there's going to be that essence of looking at everything they decided to give up.
Well, the Bible says every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. But I mean, he created them as well. The angels were created by God. They wouldn't have existence, they wouldn't have life apart from him. So, you just figure over time, maybe you start, I mean, we can over time assess things and say, maybe a different choice would have been better, but, whatever.
I think there's a derangement of the mind that sets in once they set their mind to evil.
Mm.
And I kind of likening that to what's happening in our country's political arena. I mean, we're seeing people doing and saying very irrational things as though they're rational and normal and understandable. We're seeing the political opposition is so strange. Hear them say something and you think, why would they even think this, It's like the mind is in a different place. They're not thinking logical or rational, or it's hard to know. And I think that's probably where the demons got to. They've just bent on their own hatred and anger.
I don't think they're done though. I think they understand that they've already lost.
I don't
Well, I think they have one shot at winning.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case because, then why make such an issue unless it's just the thing of, we know we're gone and we don't want anybody else to experience heaven. We know we'll hurt God by keeping you out and me out and anybody else out of heaven, out of the kingdom.
Well, I mean, you think about how demons just, they get confronted even with the name of Christ, and they have to leave because they know it's too powerful.
Yeah.
They even get told about the name, they have to run away. So it's like they know they've lost. They can't fight anything about it. They can't even fight one angel that is still.
I think one of the things that's
with
most
Christ.
revealing is that in the end they try to take heaven by force. I think that reveals their great sense of
Urgency.
pride.
When they come up,
I don't think it's, I'm just saying I don't think it's regret. I think it's like, it's that basic drive to survive. But it doesn't seem like there's remorse for what they did or what they've done.
Exactly. There's no
It just
remorse.
seems like their hatred is so deeply ingrained that they're willing to try to dethrone God and kill and destroy anything in their path that separates them. I mean, which doesn't make any sense. But
well, it's
I
the
think
sheer
that's what
vast
Mom said about
numbers.
becoming so deranged is like, how does a being created think it can surpass God?
Revelation 20 tells us, of course, the motivation there is that, the number of people in the city is small. Look at the vast numbers that we have. Just the sheer numbers alone scream out victory. That's my city, that's my rightful place, let's go take it, we can do it. So, I mean, and then, they surround the city with this huge multitude. So it's an affront against the power of God.
And the Reedy said, could it be similar to how things are with a reprobate mind?
You mean that you get to the place where you realize, like, darkness is more desirable
Light.
to you than light?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
darkness.
just totally
flip it
shut
around.
out the light.
Flip it around. Anyway,
The light hurts.
we started a series on marriage in the first home, the first family. And Elijah's leading out in that, and he's going to come to the captain's chair, and he's going to continue to do so.
Like how he did that, he sounded like a baseball announcer.
Right. And in this corner.
I want this in the window blower.
Romans 1:27 to 29 is what the reading sent over.
That's the one where they became men burned in their
Yeah.
passions one for another. Passage. Inordinate desire.
Mm-hmm.
It's as though they get to a certain point where all common sense goes out the window.
Yeah.
And it's just sheer, blind passion. What I want, what I desire, and nothing else matters.
And nothing else matters.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Funny how song phrases fit.
Yeah, I mean it is interesting, and I think it's really sad, you know. And I've often wondered. I think maybe the question's been tossed around before, as if an angel could repent, or if they simply just wouldn't, and that's why it doesn't seem any of them will.
I think with every being there is a point of no return. I think there's a point beyond which you don't care or desire to repent. I think you can go so far into the darkness that it is preferable to the light. And the light hurts and you don't want to deal with it. I don't think I think they just reach that spot where there's a tipping point.
Yeah, getting to the point where you just don't want to repent.
And I think heaven would be torture
Yeah.
to those beings.
Because I know that Ellen White talks about Lucifer at the time coming back to heaven and trying to
Yeah.
get into his original position, and it doesn't seem that was possible. But does that mean that he couldn't come back at all, or that he just wouldn't be allowed to be in that position next to God? And that he just wasn't willing to accept a lower place?
We'll just have to wait and see how it played out.
Ask those questions. Cool. Well, like Dad said, we're talking about marriage, and we kind of went through some of the summary points, and we're going to hit a lot of them again today because I just wanted to go more in depth with some of those points regarding those prerequisites to getting married. And then over the coming weeks we'll talk about things like, you know, marriage and you know, all the things that make that up, whether that's the role of the husband, the role of the wife, the role of a father, a mother, etc., and just kind of look at all those things.
I think we're at a point where society is losing track of all of those roles, trying to homogenize everything into this equality where all the lines are blurred.
Oh yeah, and I think out of the main roles that are misplaced, I mean, obviously the role of women we look at is one of the ones that seems to be very predominantly attacked at the moment. But I think the role that's been attacked the most, and maybe even just more subtly, has been the role of men, and the type of men we ought to be. You know, television.
Well, it's easily been more attacked because women are constantly attacking men's rights by trying.
Well, that's still very general, but
Yeah,
I think
but
what
like,
I'm
I just
saying
feel
is
like they're
that,
always.
the way a godly man is supposed to be, and well, the way a man is supposed to be in general, is very much attacked in society.
I was gonna say the way a man's supposed to be is godly.
Yeah, but I mean the masculine role is just very distorted. So I mean that's stuff we're going to talk about too, because I think that's important. But so we'll just kind of quickly touch on those 3 points that I made last Sabbath regarding those things that kind of make up like a successful marriage, you might say, or a biblical marriage, is the idea of self-awareness, awareness of your partner, and unity. You know, so kind of just approaching it from the question of when exactly is someone ready to marry. And so I wanted to start off by asking, you know, what are some common myths that you guys have heard about marriage that you feel you found out were untrue later? Like, you know, like unrealistic expectations that you thought marriage was about when you started, and then realized later that it wasn't, or you know, because I feel like marriage is something that has become really romanticized in a funny way. I mean, I think it is romantic, but it's become embellished to be something that it's not. You know,
I think there's this romantic notion that your life is about finding the one, as though there is somehow some other human being out there that will so completely match your wishes and desires and thoughts that you will complete each other.
Yeah.
And the focus, that's a very selfish focus. Because when someone said, rather than finding the one, you ought to focus on being the one for somebody else. And when you're doing that, you are giving of yourself. And so you want to look for someone that has similar interests as yours. But this idea that somehow there's this magic that's going to occur and you are suddenly going to be complete for each other is just total nonsense.
Thanks, Disney. Yeah, I think
Yeah, it's Disney. It's all the romance that started in the late 1800s that began to be that it's called the Romantic period in many books. That's when most of the books began to be about romance. Before that time, if you wanted to talk about something that would be dramatic, it was the Old West. It was about life. But suddenly there began to be this genre of novels that talked about this hot, searing romance. And all of these things, even the Anne of Green Gables series, it was about her wanting to write these kind of things and learning that the things that were worth writing about were about real life. But, that whole era brought in this whole confusion about love and marriage and even about sex. And it all culminated in the women's rights movement.
Yeah.
That was very much alive and well in the late 1880s and moving into the 1900s.
It obviously wasn't something that just exploded. I mean,
right.
It's been in the works for a long time, I'm sure.
But it was an assault on the home, an assault on the family. God created marriage and the family in the garden. That and the Sabbath were the only two things that were brought out of Eden. And so Satan has attacked both of them. He attacked the Sabbath, and then in this last 1,000 years or so, he has been really attacking the home so much, to the point where we talk about the nuclear family and how it doesn't matter whether it's 2 men, 2 women, 3 people, 5 people, animals, kids, all of that stuff involved is a family, and it's just romantic, perverted foolishness.
Yeah.
Well, it's a distortion, of course.
Yeah.
I know that I think as a young man growing up, I don't know if I even developed an expectation of what a wife should be. Certainly what a mother should be. Of course, if you're growing up, in a family, you have a mom, you have a dad, and so that they become kind of a role model in a sense. And I think you develop a lot of your values based on what you're living through as you're growing up.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is out there, I don't know if it's just a perception that you get to a certain age, you get married. Of course, you have a job first, then you get married, and of course you normally you have a vehicle. So you have a vehicle, you have a job.
Progression.
There's this progression where you have a vehicle, then you get so you get around, then you have a job, then you get married, and then you have you buy a home, you have 2-car garage and a couple
Stress
of kids,
over the debts.
couple of kids and a dog, and maybe a cat. But anyway, maybe some goldfish. But there's this perception, the progression that this is, and I think really when you think about it, that's one of the reasons why, that perception alone is one of the reasons why we got into such economic distress over the last 20, 30 years, is because the government kind of bought into that and promoted this idea that everybody should have a home. And so they started dumping.
Everybody should own a house.
Own a house.
Right.
So they started
That you rent from
offering,
the
offering all these mortgages to people that weren't qualified. And of course, you do that long enough, you end up with severe problems, which is, I think there's something like somebody calculated 600 trillion, say million or billion, $1 trillion worth of credit default swaps, which means that that's totally something that cannot be
ever paid back
or ever satisfied. It just has to eventually
Vanish into thin air.
eventually
I was
collapse.
about to say, because that's because credit's not money, right? I mean,
All right. So, but I mean that shows you the magnitude of what our government did, and I think a lot of times it was
Not only our
based-
government, but all the other governments of the world followed suit. I mean,
Well,
the
what
world
happened
around
was
the world, national debt is a
the
problem everywhere.
the brainiacs on Wall Street bundled all these mortgages in these packages and sold these packages to investors around the planet. And then, of course, they began to default. As people began to default, these became toxic assets that they all of a sudden wanted to get rid of. So anyway, it's just a domino effect. But all of it started with the idea of what is marriage and what's a family, and they deserve a home. They deserve a house. So, get a car, get a job, get a wife,
Or husband.
get a house with a two-car garage and a dog. And that's the American dream, right? That's the American dream. Well, look where it's taken us.
As George Carlin said, they call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it.
You got to be asleep to believe it, and it's turned into quite a nightmare, actually.
Oh, and it's not
Yeah.
just that. And I saw a thing recently where the government experimented with television in its early years, and most of us didn't even know we were being experimented on, but that they were putting subliminal messages in advertising in the 50s and 60s
Right.
that would flash words like consume.
That's right.
And it was designed to push this whole consumerism concept
Right.
where you got to have more. You got to whatever your parents had, you got to have more, and you got to have it sooner. And then along comes this magic thing called a credit card.
Yeah.
In the I guess it might have been the late 60s or early 60s when they brought out credit cards, and every family could get one.
And of course, materialism was one of the reasons why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was listed there in Ezekiel 16. So, listen, the enemy knows where he had to take society to gain control of us. And that, of course, is what's really happened in a nutshell.
Well, the whole plan was to keep us so busy buying and taking care of things that we lose track of people.
Yeah. And what really the young
And we lose
ladies,
track of our values too.
what the young ladies realized, I think, growing up also, is that if they just look good, they'll get a husband to kind of whisk them away from wherever the situation they might be in.
Is it?
And they'll get a husband because it's all about physical attractiveness.
yeah.
And so I think, the Bible, of course, talks about deeper values than those. And
If it looks fake.
it looks not only it looks fade, but I mean, if you don't have personality similarities, and if you don't have common interests and so forth, then the rapport and what do they call it? There's a particular word, infatuation. Infatuation will wear off eventually. Serotonin only stays in the system there for maybe, 4, 5, 6
You mean
months.
dopamine?
6 months. Pardon?
You mean dopamine?
Dopamine, serotonin.
Serotonin's the sleep hormone, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's.
Like dopamine is the
Dopamine is what controls
Do-
happiness.
dopamine is the
and
happy hormone.
Okay.
You get a dopamine release.
Or pheromones were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's some chemical reactions that are taking place.
Eat
when
turkey
you,
every day. It takes 6
when you
months.
develop
for
that
to settle down.
relationship. And so I think most relationships really are built, at least initially, on a physical attractiveness.
Oh, sure.
You know.
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure that was Adam's first inclination when he saw Eve was, wow, what a hottie, like. I don't know.
Maybe he just said, "Wow, there's somebody else that looks similar to me."
Well, sure, but I mean, I think
And she's the only one, so hey, babe, you're it.
But I mean, I think it's built into men for that visual appeal sense as well. Like, I don't think it's a downside. I don't think it's a problem of sin. I think we are created.
That's
to
one of the biggest
like
downfalls.
physical appeal because God made beauty.
Well, like
beautiful.
Samson told his parents, "She looks good. Go get her for me."
Yeah.
That's
The
one of the
readings
biggest
say it's
downfalls
like
of
the
man.
candy coating on Smarties. No substance or depth.
Yeah.
You get the sweet coating on the outside that wears off, and suddenly there's this ooh.
So men really need to be taught that there has to be more than just that. And
Yeah.
I think as a young man growing up in a secular home, we were never instructed in that.
And
fashion.
who has been the primary educator of our young people? The television.
Yeah, the public education.
We grew up
Public
parked in
education that
front of the
teaches you
TV
about all
as
that.
kids, everything focused on sex and sex appeal. They used sex to sell everything
Well,
from
yeah.
toothpaste to cigarettes to automobiles.
Of course.
And it's like sex was the driving force in everything.
Yeah.
When did sex become the driving force? The time
I
of
think-
Sigmund Freud, and that's what he
No, I
talked
think
about.
I just
Sick
right
mind
on. I think
Freud.
it goes all the way back to the
Sick
beginning.
mind, yeah.
It's the easiest thing because that's the biggest downfall of man is usually visual things. That's
Yeah, like I
generally
said,
because it's like men have the biggest issue with pornography because of that reason. Because we are the easiest to fall for things that are visual, because we see it and we're like, wow.
Yeah.
That's why women don't fall for it as much, because you guys are more like auditorial,
They're more relational.
more relational auditorial. Yeah.
Relational.
But yeah, I think those are valid points. But what I was saying is I just think that also that's part of the way men were made, not to have that as a downfall, but
Yeah.
just as part of the thing that does appeal to us is visual. And I don't think
It's
that's
having
bad.
it out of balance.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like I've told
Not being able
some
to
of the young
control it.
people, sex is important, sex is wonderful, God made it. But it's the icing on the cake, it's not the whole cake. And when the whole thing you've built your relationship on is icing, well, you get tooth decay,
Sweet.
It's sweet, but after a while you get sick of it.
Sweet, dude. Sweet.
I am not going to win this battle, I can tell.
Yeah,
We were outnumbered, Elsa.
Yeah.
But
But you know,
yeah, so
just think about it. Entire industries have developed because of that. Like
of
the
selling-
women have learned that if they just look good and appealing,
Yep.
they'll get men's attention. And so you have clothing industries and makeup industries, and you know all these industries, multiple billion-dollar industries that are all
Vanity
built
industries.
around women making themselves look more attractive, or supposedly. So it
Well,
becomes
the thing of it is there is such a fine line that women are not being taught. Men are being taught to go after what looks good.
right.
And so women are also getting this message that they need to look sexy, because sexy is the whole thing.
Well,
That's
you
the
know.
whole purpose of makeup, is to make a woman look aroused. The whole purpose of the fashion industry is to make a woman look like she is ready for action.
right.
And it's not about clothing yourself modestly or even attractively. It's the attractively, total different emphasis.
Which psalm is it?
Well,
that
I guess
talks
that's like
about
eye-catching.
a good
That's the whole
woman?
point. That's why I was saying it's it's a visual
Yeah, it talks
thing for
about a
men.
wife and a good
You
woman.
mean, well, there's a
Proverbs
proverb.
31?
Proverbs 31
30,
is,
okay, that's what
talks
it
about a
is.
virtuous woman.
Yeah, that's what it is. Proverbs 31.
To King Lemuel, I think,
Yeah,
from his mom or something
that's
like
an
that.
astounding chapter there.
Yeah, but so I mean, I could see where it would almost be a reasoning from cause to effect for women, because let's say you're the girl who does dress modestly and you're next to someone who wears miniskirts and has nice long legs and is attractive, and the boys are always talking to her. You're gonna be like, man, I need to compete. Like, if I
See,
want
verse 10,
attention, I
verse
gotta.
10, right, says, who can find a virtuous woman? Young men are not taught that that's what you really should be looking for. That's what you should be seeking. Who can find a virtuous woman, for her worth is far above rubies.
It doesn't say far above diamonds, because rubies were actually worth more than diamonds.
Were they really?
The
Yeah.
evaluation of the diamonds was actually a manipulation
Marketing
of society,
scheme.
a marketing thing by a diamond
It's just
marketer.
a rock.
It is. He designed it, and he made the diamond the most valuable stone, and it's not. It's far more common than anybody would give it credit for.
Yeah, it's more common than
Commercialization.
sapphire and rubies.
So
Rubies
did
and
you have
sapphires are very uncommon.
did you have any myths in mind? Because really, I don't know.
Did you have any myths you had to unlearn when you got married?
We didn't grow up. I never thought about it growing up, really.
I didn't really think about it much either. I thought about it more when Elsa and I were seriously talking about being together and getting married, and I didn't think about it as in depth as I thought I did, which I guess is probably going to always be your experience, is you'll always find things you didn't think
Well, there's always
about.
going to be surprises.
Yeah.
Listen, to the mom with 9 kids, I thought I had seen almost everything a kid could do, and every single one surprised me with
And then
something
the
that I
mom
had never
came.
seen before.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
So I mean, it's lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, just like I don't know, because I didn't buy into most of those normal myths because I had studied some, like the idea that there is a one person, You know, I just thought of it from a practical standpoint. I was like, well, people,
Okay.
their spouse dies and they remarry and they're just as happy with their next spouse as they were with the original. And so it's not like the equation is that there was only that one person who could have possibly made that person happy, but it was a matter of who you can make it work with.
Yeah, I don't think it's a one person type deal, but it's a type.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you grow up, you become programmed in a certain direction, and you're looking for that type of person to be with.
Yeah.
It's not one individual, but it's a type of person that's similar to you.
And I did have enough horrible experiences with dating that I learned a lot about marriage before I got there. You know, one of them being you can't save people. You know?
You can't fix people by dating them.
Yeah, you can't fix people by dating them. You can't.
Now,
help
see, that's
fix their
kind of a
problems.
myth from a woman's perspective, I think, more so than a man.
Yeah.
Women would get married
He'll change.
with the thought, yeah, I will change him. I'll be able to stop his drinking. I'll be able to stop his gambling. I'll be able to stop his. You know, you got all these things that a woman is going to fix.
Which aren't bad things
Right.
to fix.
And it's certainly noble to think about helping someone, but ultimately it never works out the best.
I saw a picture
Yeah.
on Facebook recently that showed a woman changing a diaper and said that's the only time a woman can change a man.
And then again, when he's older, don't forget that.
To be married, you have to know how to be single.
Yeah.
Good point.
And a lot of people don't know how to be single. Because if you can't live with yourself, why do you expect someone else to live with you?
Well, that's a huge point that we bring out further in the study as well as one of the prerequisites is self-dependently happy.
I was
there you go.
told when I was studying about this in my teen years that the primary reason for a couple to get married is that they can do more for the Lord together than they could do separately. That the combination is going to be more effective than either of them could be on their own.
I would say that's certainly the more noble of all the goals.
But
Yeah.
most couples don't think of that.
You know.
Most people today,
Most people marry for themselves.
most people get married for themselves. They get married
Yeah.
because they make me feel good.
Yep, and of course people come with baggage, right?
Everybody comes
Everybody
with
comes with
baggage.
baggage.
Some more than others, some less.
Well, like you were saying earlier, that we grow up establishing our role models on the basis of what we see in our parents. Well, today we have 65 to 75% of all kids growing up in a home without a dad full time.
Or two moms.
That's another story altogether.
And that's what
Yeah.
But when you see kids growing up without a male role model, that means the next generation grows up not really knowing what a father and husband
like.
is. So they don't know how to be one, they don't know how to become one.
They just know to mess around and disappear like their dad.
That's exactly it. And that's
Yeah.
what we've seen repeated in many places is that kids become notches on a gun belt. You know, how many kids can I spawn?
How many kids can you
She's
spawn?
smiling.
Showing her teeth.
So
She's
talking
smiling.
about those marriage myths, you know, the biggest one, the first one I listed was the one you brought out, that there's this idea that there is this one. And I think in terms of the grand scheme of all time, there's only ever been two instances where that's been accurate. And the first one would obviously be Adam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Eve was made directly for him. And the second, I think, is the bride of Christ. You know, I think those are the only two marriages that have actually been made for each other.
I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, you know, when
Oh, of course, you and I as
Yeah.
well.
when Eleazar went out to find a wife for, was it Isaac? Yeah.
Yes.
And he goes out to find a wife.
At a well.
You know, he goes out to look for a wife for his master's son.
That was the social
I mean,
networking
when you
place,
think about
place
this-
to network.
Yeah, that was the
You
social
guys know any
network
single
hub.
ladies around here? Be interested in marrying a rich young man?
I'm saying, you look at this and you think, who would ever think about marrying somebody that your servant went and found for you?
It's a lot of trust.
Dad brings this girl home and says, I found you a wife.
I know she's rough around the edges, but she'll work hard. I think that's what all of us were afraid of.
But see,
with
you
that
look
idea.
at you look at these stories about marriage in the Bible, and the parents were connected to the story, to the kids getting married.
Yeah.
And we've lost that because now it's all about I get to pick for myself and I don't care what my parents think, what they want. There's a total disharmony in that regard because who would ever think of asking their parents about a choice for a life partner?
Right. Well, we've progressed past a culture that is willing to abide by those type of rules, and also there's such a greater diversity now. Whereas, Eleazar was looking for a wife within a certain class. He wasn't just going out to the community.
He didn't do a fashion show or a beauty
Right.
pageant.
He was, and that's why in the Bible you have people say, why don't you get somebody from your own tribe or from your own culture, instead of going out for a Philistine,
They still practice that in West Virginia.
Yeah, right. In Israelite.
That's not fair.
Sorry. Carry on.
They practice that in all parts of the Appalachians, believe me.
Yeah. So,
But you saw what Eleazar did, how he evaluated, was that he watched. It was customary for that the women would offer to get a drink at the well for whoever the strangers were.
especially strangers.
That was customary. That was just common courtesy.
Still.
But
practiced
she
in the
not
Middle
only
East
got
today.
him a drink, she also got water for his animals.
He was looking
Without being asked, without any question, she thought of the extra mile. And that's what he saw right away. She's a woman that
She
thinks
was a
beyond the
worker.
surface.
An A worker. She
No,
wasn't a
I don't
B.
think she was an A worker. I think it's that she was thoughtful.
He hit her
Well,
with a
that's
white
what makes you.
sticker.
That's what makes you
Yeah.
an A worker. You,
Like
you,
someone
you don't
should
just
put
do what you're
a
asked. You
bracelet
go
on
beyond that.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're losing that
Like
ability in our
Galatians
society
3.
today, too.
Oh, that's virtually gone.
I mean, we have a whole generation that can't think beyond what they are told to do and nothing beyond that. You've got to develop a whole different mindset. And that's exactly what Christianity is about, though, is recreating the mind. When you have the mindset of God, everything changes. You're looking at a much bigger picture than just me, what I want, what I feel. What does God want?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what the burning question that most people are not asking when it comes to marriage in the home is, what does God want?
It would be, of course, it's all water under the bridge now, but it would have been great if school systems would have had within their curriculum courses on home economics and raising a family. I mean, they used to have home economics.
They're
But that
trying to
was just
call
about
for
cook.
doing taxes.
That
in
was just
schools now.
cooking and sewing and doing that kind of thing. But for
Well, they did
for
that
men.
because women were now in the workplace, and women
Right.
were not home teaching their daughters how to take care of a house and how
Right.
to take care of kids and
Right.
do the basics. So the school system stepped in and said, let me do what the parents are not doing, and public education has just...
but
taking
not even,
over all
I
of
don't
that.
think today that's even.
I mean,
No,
the
they're
church
not
has
taught
done
anymore.
that. The
They don't do that
government's
anymore
done
today.
that.
So
But once again, it's this whole role of the home and the family that God set out there as the foundation of all society.
right.
Everything is built around the home, and as the home disintegrates, society disintegrates.
Mhm.
And what we're seeing now is the outgrowth of that.
Absolutely.
In World War II, all the available men were sent off to war. And so the government enlisted women to come in and work in the factories. Well, when the men came home, the women stayed working in the factories, and they decided they liked this two-income deal.
Mhm.
And so women became factory workers and office workers and whatnot, and that became a whole lot more fun than having a family and raising your kids. It's much easier to farm them out to somebody else. So moms aren't raising their own kids, dads aren't home involved with their own kids, and we see this complete deterioration. It's like
Yeah, we wonder why.
a
It's pretty
landslide.
simple, isn't it?
Why is society crumbling?
It's pretty simple, really. Because the family crumbled.
But that's exactly, when we watched that video that you recommended when you were at AFCO, Divided, the
Yeah.
movie. What he
Youth
found when
ministry.
he investigated the roots of youth ministry was that it came out of the Sunday school movement, which happened right around 1776, interestingly enough, where this one guy who was a humanist, he was a newspaper publisher, and he believed that society needed to be improved by educating the poor. And he had no godly leanings at all, but he was able to talk his church into doing a Sunday school for the factory workers in the afternoons, because that was the only day that the kids were off from the factory. And he believed he could change society
With education.
by educating the kids. And there were church leaders who saw this and thought this would be a great thing to implement in their church for their own kids. And there were leaders who said, this will destroy the moral fabric of society. And you think today, you look at this and you say, how could the Sunday school have destroyed the moral fabric of society? And yet it did, because when the parents no longer
Segregating.
felt it was
It was
their
segregation.
responsibility to teach their kids,
Yeah.
and then it became the church's responsibility, and the church educated the kids
Then
up
the
through
schools.
probably around the 1800s or so. And then this public school movement began to be
Which
where the government
was
then
designed to
stepped in.
take God out of the same equation, just to move God aside.
And so as the parents gave up their responsibility for teaching their kids to another authority, and then that authority gave that up to the
The
state,
state.
now you see society is at the point now where we are adopting the socialist platform that the children belong to the state.
Right.
And it's the state's job to educate, feed, clothe, and house their property.
Yeah.
And you can't tell the state what you're allowed. You no longer have the right to protect your children, to defend them against unwanted immunizations, medical treatment. You know, that one family in, I think it was in Florida, that the daughter was diagnosed with some type of cancer, and it was in remission, and they didn't want to put her through chemotherapy, and the state came and took that child and forced her to go through chemotherapy. And I mean, it's a terrible thing to do, to completely destroy the role of the parents and their authority and their right to teach their children
The way
and
we
raise
want-
them the way they want to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that's all stuff that we'll address more heavily as we get into those topics as well, with parenting and, you know, all that. But I think that bridges a lot of gaps in terms of, you know, the collapse of where we are now. And it is amazing to look at it because the devil is a brilliant strategist, you know, and he can plan 1,000 moves ahead.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And when you divide the home,
I think another thing too that certainly in my own upbringing I could say is that it never seemed like my parents worked at their relationship. And so as you grow up, you think, oh, there's nothing to this, man. You know, the man goes off to work, the woman's
Mom cleans house.
Mom cleans house.
Man
Kids
keeps
come
home,
along, they grow up and go to school.
man
Man,
comes
it's
back.
just, there's nothing to it.
He eats dinner, he watches TV, he goes to bed.
There's nothing to it, right? So it's like there's one of
it's
the
the
myths, I
Flintstones
guess.
generation.
One of the myths, I guess, would be that there's really no effort. You just kind of living together, and stuff automatically happens. You don't really have to work at it.
In fact, you'll see
I mean,
that
isn't that
most
what
of,
you guys have found?
most of the
You- you
premises
two-
of the
you found
TV
you don't have
shows
to be
about
working at
families,
anything, right? There's no working at anything.
most of
keep
the foundation of the
relationship
TV shows about the family today are about damage control.
going.
Trying to fix something that they did wrong. Not about trying to keep it from freaking up, but
Right.
trying to fix something after they've screwed it up.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, I mean those are definitely all popular ones. Another one is that I found anyways is for some people is that conflict means your marriage is struggling. That if there are problems, it means your marriage is failing. That kind of thing. You know, probably less common, but I think a lot of people, because we live in a
They
divorced
think some
society.
of this romantic idea is that you'll never disagree if you're made for each other.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that's another myth growing up. If you don't like the person, or if something comes up 6 months, a year down the road that really rubs you the wrong way, you just get rid of that one and get another one. So there's the idea of divorce is kind of like it's a routine thing.
Well, we changed
It's an option.
in this generation to where we now have what they call no-fault divorce.
Right.
You can get a divorce for no reason
No
whatsoever,
reason whatsoever.
just because you want to.
Right.
You change people as
Well, you
often as
know,
you change socks.
And all you
There
got to
was
do is
another
say,
time-
divorce you, you know, because you burnt the toast, right?
Well, I was about to say there was another time in the Bible where it obviously was a prominent issue too, and that was at the time of Christ when they were coming to him asking him the same question. You know, can a man divorce his wife for any reason? You know, so I mean, it's obviously been a prominent question, and a prominent issue, I think. And I think most of it deals with the misunderstanding of what a marriage is in the eyes of God. And
Jesus answered it right away. Moses gave that because of the hardness of your hearts. If men were living godly and trying to follow the Lord, the divorce wouldn't be a question. It wouldn't even come into the equation.
Yeah.
Because godly men would be seeking to keep a godly household and it wouldn't be done through force. It would be done in a godly fashion. God never works by force, and godly husbands wouldn't work by force. But that whole concept of getting a divorce because she fixed a meal that you didn't like or she displeased you in some way, that's not a godly attitude. You know.
I don't know if that's a super realistic reason why a lot of people get divorced, though. I do know that it's like 50% of people get divorced in the United States.
No, it's 75% now.
Is it 75?
Yep.
Financial concerns is one of the, probably the big issue.
Yeah, it's
They
financial
say
concerns.
finance
Susan says
is
it's a
one of the
disposable
biggest ones.
philosophy. Relationships are disposable.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good
People are not disposable.
Right.
But we have babies that are disposable. The elderly are going to be disposable.
Right. It's,
The deformed and people with birth defects, they should be disposable. That was all what Hitler was basing his eugenics on, and
right.
eugenics came right from the hand of Margaret Sanger here in the United States. Hitler just copied her philosophy.
Yeah, and she probably probably goes way back to that
Babylon.
same. Yeah, to that
Well,
same.
it also goes back to another contemporary of Margaret Sanger, who's Charles Darwin.
Right.
And so once Darwin began teaching, and people bought into this idea that we're
We're
just
just
single cells that crawled out of the ooze, and that's where we're going back to, then nothing we do matters.
right.
There's no accountability, no morals. It's all do whatever you want to do.
Charles Darwin
Live
was
like you
smart
want
up
to
until
live,
that
because
point of
tomorrow you
evolution.
die.
He had some really good stuff before that.
Well, and a lot of people attribute Darwin as if he was the one who came up with the idea of evolution, but I mean, it's been an idea ever since ancient Greece.
He's the one who made it popular. And
Right.
And he was
Yeah.
the one who just put some science words to it and said, I saw a bird with a beak slightly longer than that one, and there were different feathers, and blah, blah, blah. You know, so he
He
was the one
pointed
who
out
made
adaptation.
it popular. But I mean, for hundreds and
Adaptation.
even thousands of years before him, that's been an idea that's been
Sure.
pushed.
Yeah.
You know, that nature is
Oh.
God, essentially.
Don Aldrich has joined us.
Oh, nice.
How about that?
So I mean, but so that is another prominent one that conflicts in your marriage means it's failing, and so a lot of people will abandon ship because there's stress and because it's too hard and it's way too easy for us just to sign some paper and run away. You know, because we don't have that strong sense of obligation. And one thing that I have found is that I think the more I study about marriage, the more I realize it is perhaps the single greatest commitment you can make on this earth.
Certainly the one that
well,
Christ
death do
made.
us part is one of the points.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, a commitment to Christ, yes, but I think in terms of our human relationships, I think it is I feel like it's the biggest one we can make because it deals with, you know, like we can all, like a relationship with Christ is a personal thing and has nothing to do with other people necessarily. But like a marriage ties other people in, it ties you economically,
Other families.
it ties you to other families, it ties you politically, and it, you know,
It builds community.
it builds community or tears it apart.
Yeah.
But I think it is perhaps the single greatest commitment in terms of how much is at stake that you can make, besides, you know, salvation being a thing.
And of course, I think it's that
I
way
think that's pretty
because-
true because of what Christ did.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, Christ obviously.
It's the biggest commitment you can
Yeah,
make,
Christ made
commitment
the
he
biggest universal commitment.
which I think is the example that he was trying to serve for actual marriage probably as well.
Yeah.
Because then it should be to the point where you're like, I'm gonna give everything for it, I guess.
Right. So.
Sacrifice all.
And then the last one I had listed for the myths there was another one that we had brought out, which was that you'll be happy or completed. You know, because a lot of people get married for themselves and they think that everything will magically fall into place. You know, I mean, my friend obviously got married thinking a lot of issues would resolve. And
He saw the warning signs, but thought that they would get better in
once
time.
they were settled, yeah. And he would tell me at the time when they were, you know, trying to work some things out that, you know, that he always kind of envisioned that they would be that couple later that would have to end up writing books together because of like just how much it was putting them through. But, you know, that's a crazy situation there.
It's so foundational, and that's because it is foundational to the good of all of society around us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we stopped focusing on godly marriage, which was a real concept that people had, and began to move toward how I feel, what I want, when we became a self-absorbed choice maker.
Mm-hmm.
when self began to be the first factor. That's where everything skews off course. Because self is not the concept that God wants society to have. This whole thing of socialism is trying to join everybody around these principles of unselfish living and sharing. But it's forced unselfishness. And you can't force the human carnal nature to be unselfish. The carnal heart is selfish to the core, and it's only through a conversion experience to Christ that gets changed to become an unselfish heart. So we can't mandate unselfishness. We can't mandate love. We can't make a law that you have to get married because of love. But this is the concept that society is built on. This is a voluntary commitment that you choose to make to another person. And it's made with the idea that the two of you together are going to produce something important that will influence the next generation and the generation after that. It isn't just about you. It's about your children. It's about your grandchildren. And the model that you leave creates the model for the next generation and the one after that. We see what's happened since the 1940s when mom left the home and dad was gone, and then they come back and they're both working in a factory. And okay, the income's great, the material possessions that are there, but neither of the parents are emotionally connected to their kids. It's all about the things. You've got to have the best clothes, the best car, the best yard, the best toys at Christmas, the biggest pile under the tree. And
It's all substituted that emotional
substituting for the emotional investment.
Well, and I think that's done with the best intentions, obviously, because parents have bought into the idea that to provide materialistic things for their kids is to be loving. Especially as a man, I think as men we're educated in a direction that we are to identify with how we can provide for our families.
Well, you're taught,
and
if
there's
you buy
nothing wrong
we
with
can
that.
provide
you're
for
taught
our
you're
families.
taught about the more expensive ring you buy for the girl you're going to get engaged to, the more you love them. That's stupid.
That's supposed to be a measure of your affections.
Yeah, it's a measure of your...
I spent $5,000. Here you go.
Here's something that you're
Wear
not
this
going to
on
wear
your
once we
hand.
get married.
I saw the thing where the guy was going to propose to his girlfriend, and he had this family heirloom ring that was worth thousands of dollars, and they had this romantic setting on this beautiful bridge, and he dropped the ring, and it slipped through the boards into the river.
Yeah, I remember seeing that.
And nobody was ever able to find that ring. The value of the relationship is what we should be focusing on, not the monetary rewards. When we began to have a dowry system in some cultures where, the father had to provide a certain amount of a dowry, it's like you were auctioning off your daughter or something, I guess, in essence,
Well, I mean, from a practical standpoint, I could see where in certain societies that would make sense, because you're losing a part of your livelihood when you give away your child. In like an agrarian society, you've got a daughter.
She milks 20 cows a day.
Yeah, I'm going to be losing out on somebody who's helpful around here, and also what proof do you have that you are going to be suitable to take care of her, or, I mean, from that kind of standpoint, I could see where.
But the dowry was what the father provided to get the guy to take the girl.
I thought it was what the guy provided to get the girl.
No.
Yeah, he had to pay.
Well, there's a difference in that, but I'm saying the father usually provided a dowry of some sort, that the wife came with some kind of share of the inheritance.
Yeah, it's my daughter's worth this much kind of thing.
Oh, gotcha.
But the suitor also had to pay.
They had to make a contract on it.
Yeah, there had to be a contract.
And the parents also had to know what his family background was like, and did he come from good people? When you talked about these things,
make her happy.
could he provide and make her happy? Yes.
Yeah.
Remember that line from the Fiddler on the Roof? Something about the matchmaker talked about. He's a fine man, a good man. Something about he'd beat you, but only when he's sober, so you're all right.
Yeah.
It was like,
Oh, good.
it was like they were looking at this set of standards. That he's got money, he's got a living, but
You'll be
he's
taken care
abusive,
of.
but you'll be taken care of. That it's like, who would trade this? Who would trade their child for this kind of sell-off? You want the best quality you can find for your kids. And when the parents stopped being consulted, I think it really, really messed up a lot of the fabric of society.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of honoring your parents was bringing them into the equation when you want to have a spouse.
Yeah, and we didn't really get to dig into a ton of this portion yet.
Well, we'll just have to
But
dig into it next week.
I'll just summarize it with these two points here, and then I've got scriptures that we'll use next time.
I was going to say, we really haven't gotten into as much Bible verses on this one this time
But I
around,
think it's because in a lot of ways marriage is a very, I don't know, philosophical would be the right term, but there's a lot of meat to it that is not expressed directly. You know, like we've referenced the stories to gain understanding for what these things should be.
It's implied,
think, yeah.
but it's not like a thou shalt not or a thou shalt. It's more of a learn by the example of this one, you know, who did it right, who did it wrong.
Yeah. So the two little points that I wanted to bring out of that little bit there is that struggles help us grow if we overcome them, but they don't resolve themselves. People decide to. You know, so struggles in marriage and conflicts in marriage are only resolved when the two people who are supposed to be working together actually actively choose to work together.
And sometimes that means you set aside what you want to do what the other one wants.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge issue. I mean, in a society that is all about me, what I want, because I'm worth it, you know, to give up, to willing to sublimate your desires to someone else's desire. And when you're mutually looking at doing that, it creates some interesting circumstances too.
One of the things I wanted to bring out too, which was kind of interesting, is that when in Genesis, when it talks about the husband and wife cleaving to each other, and of course the word that we've got there is to cling or adhere by impinge, right? So kind of like to wedge together kind of thing. But what was interesting too is it also is a phrase that is used figuratively to describe catching or pursuing something. And so there's kind of an interesting element of active involvement in that marriage process, that it's not just like you cling and you're one, but it also means to pursue. You know, which just kind of has that more significant meaning to it. Second point to that was you don't need to be married to be happy. And one of the things that I kind of realized the more I was reading is that I don't think Adam was unhappy when he realized that there wasn't a helper for him. A companion. Because I feel like it's been talked about before, if not by Sister White, at least it's a theme in the Bible, that plenty of people have been happy and content just to serve God and just to be single. And in a perfect world, I don't think Adam would have been depressed or sad or felt a longing. No, he.
Oh yeah, he
was married. I think his wife. I don't know what happened.
I think she was just unnamed.
Well,
No, she was
procreation would have been a bit of a challenge.
The daughter of Jethro.
Oh, okay.
Certainly early on, the idea that God wanted to populate the planet, he knew that he had to have the two of them together.
Oh yeah.
So.
And that was my observation, was that it was God who said, "It is not good that man should be alone."
Right.
And it didn't seem to be Adam's observation, because what different would he know?
Well, angels in heaven are gender neutral. And obviously, they could be very happy in heaven.
Yeah.
So.
Just serving God in His presence seems
God.
to be fulfillment enough.
Sure, should be.
We don't know if other created beings have the power to procreate, so maybe they're fine all being alone, or they have companions.
It's hard to say because we just can't think outside that box. But.
And just to add to that, though, is that he ended up showing Adam that that he didn't have a partner to help him, and so it seems that it was God's observation that man would need help, and that man would need companionship. And of course, if he wanted the population to grow, that was also a given as well.
I think it's also a good message and story to, at least to everything about, like, it's not good for man to be alone. I think that still even applies today, because it's like, you think about your problems in general, like just dealing with struggles, it's better that you can share that with somebody than just to be alone and
of course
harbor that kind of stuff. So like it applies to all those things, that it's better to be with somebody regardless.
And so the final,
Communication is important.
and so one of the final points to make to this one portion anyways, is that, what I'm drawing from this is that one of the main prerequisites is to be independently happy and content in your relationship with Christ before going out and finding
You're
someone
gonna bring out
else
the two great commandments.
to serve God with. Yeah, love your neighbor and love God.
Love thy neighbor as
Thyself.
As thyself. Yeah. First, you have to know how to love yourself. If you don't know how to love yourself, you can't love your neighbor.
In a spiritual sense.
Yeah.
So where did you want to take it for next time? Did you want to take it in the direction of men's responsibilities in marriage and then women's responsibilities in marriage, or where did you want to end up taking that?
We can. I had a little bit more detail we could touch on, but it might not be as imperative since we talked about a lot of that when we discussed those marriage myths. So yeah, we might take it in that direction of the responsibilities of a man and responsibilities of a woman, in regards to marriage.
This is a really fabulous study when you get into those roles that the Lord engineered.
I find that they're quite controversial too.
In this generation, they will be.
In this generation, it's very
Darn
controversial
Generation
because
Z.
it doesn't sound appealing to people in this day and age.
Well, like you were saying earlier too, you have a situation now where females are taking more of the male role, and then vice versa. The men have taken more of the.
Well, the women's
female
movement
roles.
has emasculated the role of men.
I think it's just
You
ridiculous.
know, they're trying to make them all soft and sentimental and sappy and totally gutless in the most of the characterizations that you'll see in television. They're either devious or they're gutless.
Or they're dumb.
Yeah. And it's a sad thing that we have so few role models in our world that you can point to for really strong, godly, thoughtful men. I mean, you can be a compassionate, considerate, thoughtful man. You don't have to lose your masculinity to care about somebody. But by the same token, you can't be a pushover that has no backbone and doesn't stand for anything. There's a balance that was always supposed to be there.
Yeah, the controversial thing is just people not understanding at all, because it's like the Bible talks about how the woman is the submissive role, but submissive doesn't mean like a slave, doesn't mean like no voice, doesn't mean she should be quiet. It just means the lead is more so taken by the man. But that doesn't mean that like the woman can't lead. Which people hear is submissive and they instantly think like, oh, your rights are gone, or like now you're a slave to your husband or whatever. That's ridiculous.
Frankly, as a woman, I like having the man making the decisions.
And
I do,
because of
it's
the way men are conditioned now, a lot of men prefer if women make the choices.
Yeah.
Especially for food.
Oh yes.
Oh.
What do you want to eat today? Want to go out and eat? Where do you want to go? No, I don't care where
Hey,
you want to
listen,
go.
I was just reading Proverbs, and it illustrates here on what you're supposed to be doing when you get up at night. It says here, the heart of her husband safely trusts her, she will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax, and willingly works with her hands. She's like a merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night, and provides food for her household and a portion for her male maid servants. So these are some of the things that she's industrious, she's thoughtful, she's constantly thinking
She
about.
plans ahead.
It's almost like the woman is like the leader of the household.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Queen of the
Wow.
She is. The
Well,
woman should be the
exactly.
queen of the household,
Queen of the castle.
and the man is the king of the family.
Yeah, he's just supposed to be the provider, hunter,
She gets up
and
early before
protector.
sunrise, and he gets the food all made up, and so that when he gets up,
That's because he's already up milking the cows and stuff.
Yeah.
He just provides the spiritual
praying.
food and the actual. He just helps hunt the actual.
If the
food.
woman's up before dawn, the men are up way before dawn.
He said Galatians 5:22-23.
What is that, Galatians 5?
5:22-23. They also said a recent message we listened to, the presenter pointed to God being with us in the midst of affliction.
says, but the
Is that what marriage is, in the midst of affliction?
well, yeah, it can be. Galatians 5:22 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, and meekness, temperance."
Against such there is no law.
Yeah, I was listening to a study, and I was listening to like a sermon, and the guy was saying that a marriage is never supposed to involve only two people, because even in the first place, when it took place, it was always the Father God and the Holy Spirit. So you always had three being joined, so it was always man, woman, and God in the center. That was always the marriage. It's always three.
So
what
the
God
two-legged
has
table
joined
doesn't
together.
stand.
Two-legged table does not stand.
But the biggest problem in society is that most marriages are not what God has joined together.
Mm.
That's why they fall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but they can become
Successful.
successful.
Yeah.
It just depends on the people.
I know I heard some time ago that someone was recommending changing wedding vows to "as long as we both shall love."
No, that's not a good idea. Yeah. That, and I mean, the idea is that, I mean, that is how most people view it, is as long as I'm in love with you, we'll continue to work at this. And I heard another man bring out this point where he said that it's because the way we make this commitment is we make the commitment to each other, which can be easily broken. But he said we don't make the commitment to be committed. Like, we don't make a deeper commitment than just to each other.
Yeah.
You know, it has to be something beyond the person you're just with.
And that's the reason God has to be in the center of it.
Yeah.
He is that deeper commitment.
Well,
he
you-
has
you
that
think
higher authority.
You think about, a marriage needs love. God is love. So a marriage can't survive. It can survive, but you have to have a love. And most of the time, people aren't in love, they're in heat. So.
That's a pretty good analogy.
They're in heat. That's true. That's true. All right, well, we'll pray then, and we'll get some lunch here. Father, we thank you so much for the Sabbath and for this time that you've allowed us to be together as a family. We thank you for marriage and all the beautiful things you've put in there for us. We thank you for your word that you've allowed us to understand, and we ask that you give us insight and understanding as we continue these studies over the next couple weeks, and help us to all have strengthened marriages, and for those that aren't married yet, help them to grow to the place where they are the person who will be ready for a marriage when the time comes. And help us to give full glory and honor to your name at every opportunity. And may all of our marriages be those examples to the ungodly world that you are in the midst of all of our marriages. Bless the food as we eat together, and help it to empower us to accomplish your will. Bless those who are tuning in online as well, and hope that they received a blessing by sharing and by being a part of this also. So this we ask and we pray and we thank you in the name of your